I'm gonna have fun editing all this.
We're making your job
Mildly more
harder?
inconveniencing.
I don't know.
Eh.
Job security is where my brain was going with that.
Job security.
Yeah, job security for the free gig.
Yeah. But neither here nor there.
But yeah,
Anyway,
going back to it, like I don't know. Again, kind of sticking with the devil's advocate role, I suppose. I can understand wanting the ability to revise or revoke previous editions. That just makes sense to me, right? Like, especially we're 23 years in, 23, 24 years in to the previous one. You know, most everything has some change or alteration over the course of 2 decades, right?
Yeah.
So it's not unexpected that they would allow themselves or adopt a new rule that would allow themselves the ability to change going forward.
I think the main reason why, and we'll probably learn as we go further into, peeling apart what's going on, I think the main reason why people are upset is not that they're revising it, because, I agree totally, you should revise it to, things are way different 23 years ago than they are today. You got to update the language, you got to update the lexicon, make sure, like, any sort of loopholes that might have occurred because of technology or anything like that. Yeah, sure, you've got to fill in those gaps where they arise, sure. But when you say we're just going to change the language to be a little more transparent, and all of a sudden you just rewrite the whole thing so that everything is different, that comes across as disingenuous, because you're not just rewording things, you're completely rewriting the whole thing. And I feel like that's probably why it wasn't written with the explicit it's going to apply in perpetuity, because me being a little political here, you don't want to try and base all of your stuff off of something that's several hundred years old. You want to make sure that you update things to occur with the times, and so that is present. So I feel like that might be one of the reasons why they weren't just like, this is the OGL and it will be forevermore.
It's written on the stones.
Exactly. They carved in the stones. They didn't even make a document of it. So, but like, I understand updating it in that regard, but I feel like they went, I can't say a step too far, because I feel like that would belittle it. They went like a mile too far.
Yeah, there's, with the deauthorization of the original as well, just saying like you cannot publish under this anymore, it puts creators and publishers like in a corner, like they have to agree to this new license, otherwise they can no longer make content for D&D 5e or what will be 1 D&D or 6th edition, if you want to call it that.
Why call it 1 D&D? Like 6th, it's fine, it's okay.
I don't know.
Why
Wizards of the Coast isn't making good decisions right now, Michael.
Well, I would say Hasbro and the execs at both, but
no, you got to throw you can't just bump it up the chain there. You're passing the buck there. You got to go with the actual company that's the one that's responsible for it here. Not a parent company, or because then we're going to say, well, I wouldn't blame Hasbro. I blame their CEO. Oh, I wouldn't blame him. I'd blame the shareholders that are in the meeting there that
Fair. So then in that case, who is publishing these rules? Who is saying, who's the herald that is coming, say, these come from the office of, and then Hasbro CEO, Wizards Coast. That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I definitely, I think the thing was obviously a mess in the first place, but kind of still sticking to my role. I think you can understand to a certain degree having to retire the old one if you're coming out with a new one, right? You can't have 2 OGLs out there, right? So if your plan is just shift to a new
for
OGL.
a bit, though, with 4th edition.
Yes,
because they published it under a completely different license while the original OGL is still in effect. So it can be done. Is that the smart idea?
3 OGLs? That would be crazy.
It 4? Makes sense to me to consolidate everything under one heading and try to do that going forward. Now, whether or not the rest of the changes within that are worthwhile, we'll definitely get into.
Okay.
But I can understand consolidating everything under one heading, retiring the previous one that was out there and saying this is the new law of the land. And then also, I can see your point, Jesse, about like putting creators in a bind there because like, well, I was making money off this. My business is based off this previous OGL, and now you forced me to agree to this new one. But conversely, it's not like previously they were paying royalties or anything like that, right? So if you're making your money off of a free product or a free license, then you have to shift to a new one. That doesn't also seem like too much of an ask. Like if they had been under some sort of contract where they were paying royalties and then suddenly you're forced into a new one, then I can understand because I'm like, then I would be like, well, I'm giving you 25% of my bloody income. So how can you just change it on me like this? But if your business model is based off something that you're getting access to for free and the intellectual, the IP of somebody else, and you're getting to build a business off of that, it doesn't seem crazy that the owner of that IP then changes the kind of the structure of it and says, well, you have to go along with it if you want to continue to make money.
I see what you're saying, but I feel like it also, you'd have to look at the history of the community involved with D&D. And D&D itself. D&D was never supposed to be like this multi-bajillion-dollar industry. It was something that people wanted to spread with each other. I almost likened it to a venereal disease.
I was thinking that too. I was like, where's he going with this?
It's not that far afield from but the idea behind D&D is that it was supposed to be like a sort of taking someone's creativity and kind of codifying it in a way to make it easier to communicate to other people. So instead of saying like playing imaginary games as a kid, like where you were pirates or cops and robbers or, fantasy creatures or whatever, it was some like, instead of making everything up by scratch, why don't you have this basis for which to expand from there? Because the whole idea behind D&D is that like you were given this foundation and you're like, okay.
Well, so you're preaching to the choir there, because I started playing D&D two decades ago myself. So you're preaching to the choir that way. However, a bunch of nerdy kids in high school getting together to play D&D and have fun with each other and express their creativity is different than building a business and making money off of it. So my argument is more like for those creators that are producing content and building and making money off of it, being forced to kind of agree to a new OGL doesn't strike me as unreasonable, because we're not talking at this stage. I know we're going to get into other stuff, but at this stage, for this particular point, we're not talking about changes that hinder the high school students or college people or people like us that are just looking for a sense of community and being able to express creativity in a fun way with friends. We're talking about like, oh, well, these people that are making money off of it have to agree to a new OGL if they want to continue to make their money. And that doesn't strike me as something that's hindering the community. And, like Jess mentioned at the very start of this, most of us regular everyday D&D players wouldn't even really be familiar with the OGL and stuff anyways, right? So the people that are really impacted by this aren't the community that you're talking about.
Well, I mean,
yes and no. It can affect how we consume content and what content is available for us to use. Because if all of a sudden this wealth of publishers, like I said, there was about 20 publishers that were invited to this meeting to go over the new OGL. If those 20 publishers don't agree to it and then stop making content for D&D, Wizards of the Coast only comes out with 1, maybe 2 content modules a year. Versus these 20 that may also be producing 1 or 2. That significantly limits the amount of material for people to play.
Well, so that is very true. However, I would point out that those businesses, those creators that came there, if they choose to withdraw and stop producing under the new OGL, and for instance, giving royalties over as an example, if they choose to just back out of that altogether, then all we are talking about is really a standard, regular, everyday business model. Like, this is why you don't have a Marvel movie being produced in theaters every single day, because it's a bunch of people making their own stuff off the Marvel IP, right? It's all has to come from the head source, right? It's Disney does it. And if we go back to the way things used to be, like Marvel, okay, Sony, you can make the Spider-Man movies and Fox, you can make the X-Men movies, and okay, Disney, now you own this stuff. So this is how we end up with these movies, because these different creators agree to the setup. But I couldn't just go out there now and say, hey, Michael, hey, Jesse, hey, Shane, let's all get together and let's make our own Incredible Hulk movie, right? And even if we crowdsourced and got a bunch of money for it, we'd get shut down because it's not our IP, right? So unless we agreed to Disney's, if Disney came and said, you do it this way or you don't do it at all, then that's all that, we're really talking about here with D&D is if they came out with a new OGL and say you either do it this way or you don't do it at all, it's really just standard business.
But that kind of drives home the point that we're making is that, yes, the copyright is that in that case, yes, we can't go make our own Incredible Hulk movie, but that is the rules that were previously set so that like Disney or, before Disney bought them out, Marvel, you can't just go out like, cause you will be properly sued for copyright because those are the baseline rules that were set. Everyone understands that you can't just go out and make your own Incredible Hulk. You got to make something like the Incredible Sulk, which is a real movie, and it is on the level of The Room. I have not seen it, but I've heard amazing, quote, terrible things about it. Exactly.
Nobody likes me.
I don't know the extent of it, but that it is an actual movie. I think it is called The Incredible Sulk or something similar to that, where it's like, well, we can't do copyright reasons. We can't do Hulk, but let's do something similar. Exactly. Yeah. But with D&D, it was never that you would have copyright. It was always like free, use it however you please. That is totally okay. And now they're doing a 180 and saying now you have to suddenly pay.
It was, thank you for building us up and making us super popular. Now we're going to shit on you and take all your money for it. So
yes,
thank you and you're welcome.
Exactly. If that was the original intent behind everything, most, if not all of these publishers would have just developed their own systems, or I don't know.
No, they wouldn't have, because if they could have made their own systems off the bat, they would have. This is why we're building off the IP that exists, that something that was created by somebody else, right? Because they didn't. I couldn't go out there and say, let me make my own complete, unique D&D style type game, right? I can, and I have ran campaigns through D&D, but I couldn't come up with something brand new myself. So taking somebody else's idea and kind of like getting the baton and running with it is totally different than like building your own thing from the ground up.
I guess what I'm saying is yeah, sure, fine. Maybe a couple of them might not have. I'm playing a third-party campaign that was actually made by someone that was a higher up in Blizzard during like an older version of World of Warcraft. He split off and created his own thing. I think it's War Chief Gaming. I don't know if that was one of the third-party campaign developers, but like the way that they had taken it as a base, I feel like if they could not have, they would have still made something similar, but they wouldn't have. I guess what I'm trying to say is that when the expectation is already there, when you take it back, it's almost like Halloween. Instead of giving out candy, whenever kids come up to your door, you start taking their candy, even if that is not the expectation of everyone else. It's because of the culture that comes around from it, that if there wasn't decades upon decades of this like free flowing, free exchange that gets suddenly curtailed and reverted, I feel like that is the main reason why people are really in arms. If they started off by saying, even when Hasbro bought them out, it's like, okay, if you're making X amount, like now you got to give us, 1% and start off something like that. Sure. I feel like, yeah, a couple of people would have been upset, but it would have been something that like people would have eventually, gotten onto, like, yeah, we can use this or we can create our own stuff. There's plenty of, like, as we know from the one-offs that we played on this channel, i.e. podcast, whatever, that yes, there are people that will create completely different and completely separate pen and paper game mechanics that don't involve D&D at all, sure. But when it's easier to use D&D as a basis instead of why bother recreating the whole wheel when we already know that we can use the wheel. So that's why I would say that's why a lot of people use D&D as the basis, and it took me a while to get to this point, and I'm going to have fun editing all that nonsensical rambling, But the idea is that, yeah, of course you'd use, if the wheel's already invented and it's being handed out for free, why the hell wouldn't you use it unless you want to do something completely inherently different? Like you, I don't know, want to use hoverboards or you want to use square wheels. I don't know.
But then being the person that made the wheel in the first place, right? So I see your point. Hey, if this is already here, why the hell wouldn't I use it? It's being handed out for free. But then let's go on the other side of the fence and say, okay, well, I'm the one that created this system and I own this system. And sure, you know what? I want to share it. I want to spread this enjoyment. I want to have this community grow. And then 2 decades later, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of people making a lot of money off this stuff. Hey, how about I get some of that, right? You know, like, can I get some of that? It doesn't strike me as that's crazy, because I don't think that it falls into you're taking the Halloween candy analogy, because they're not saying give me all your money. They're just saying, can I get a slice of that pie? You know, the pie that you're making off of the money that you're making money off of my idea, my IP. Can I get some of that?
Sorry, okay, that's fair. They don't take all your candy. They take, 25% if you have enough candy in your bag?
Up
something
to
that effect.
25%, yes.
Yeah. But
And
I mean, for the record, I think the whole thing was bullshit, and I'm actually.
I know you are. I see you struggling trying to come up with
Dr. Michael
points,
is like, how can I spin this?
Well,
you're
as
a
we
great
talked
political
about,
commentator because you're talking about things that you don't believe in at all.
Well, and as we've talked about before, like my doctorate is in business administration, and I've got a degree in finance as well. So I try to like put on that hat to think like, from a business admin point of view, this doesn't strike me as, at least thus far, doesn't strike me as entirely crazy.
It's not. Like when you think about a large corporation like Hasbro, they are losing money. They need to figure out how to recoup some of that loss so they don't continue to lose money and bleed out. From a business standpoint, yes, it makes sense that they would do this at the expense of your community, and this PR nightmare that has unfolded from it. I'm not sure it's worth it.
That's when it starts to fall apart, when you look at the customer base. Because if you're doing like, I like in other situations, like if say, I don't know what Unreal Engine does for video games. Let's say that they had the same sort of thing where they just gave out the Unreal Engine for people to use for free. Sure. I know that that's not the case. You have to spend a fuckload of money in order to be able to purchase the license to use Unreal Engine in your game, etc. Sure. But let's say that it was that similar difference. You know, because it's not a homebrew aspect, because not many people can just take the Unreal Engine and just work with it and create a fantastic game. Unlike D&D, which you can take very basics, because most of that just comes from creativity, whereas Unreal Engine involves a lot of technical know-how. That I would feel like that would make a lot more sense in that regard, where if you had an like an OGL license for the Unreal Engine, and then you're like, well, we're coming out with a new version of the OGL, or of the Unreal Engine, we're going to create a new licensing agreement for people to use that. And even then, I would still argue that it doesn't make sense to completely invalidate all the previous ones. Like, yeah, you can use the older, like pretty much outdated versions of Unreal Engine if you want. If it's free, sure, go for it. But people are going to know that it's not the new shit.
Well, right? So okay, let me ask you here. All right, give me, because I'm not super familiar with it. What's a third-party company that's making money off the current OGL? Like a successful company that's making, like $1 million off of it or something.
$1 million? Paizo.
Okay, so
Paizo is the creator of Pathfinder.
Okay,
which is an offshoot of D&D.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So let's think of Paizo here as an example. Then, so let me ask you, from the community standpoint, is it possible that the anger is misdirected here? Because let's say that Paizo was in that meeting, right? They were one of the 20. They're in there. Hasbro says, "Hey, this is the new OGL. This is the way it's going to be. If you're making $750K plus, we're going to start taking some royalties off that." And let's say Paizo said, "To hell with that. No, we're out. We're done. We're going to shut down the Pathfinder stuff here. We're out of this." Now,
spoilers.
From the community standpoint,
spoilers.
Well, So from the community standpoint, you're sitting there going, "Well, what the hell? I love playing these games. How the hell could Hasbro do this? This is such BS." But I would counter is that anger somewhat misdirected? Shouldn't the anger be at Paizo to say, well, yeah, you're making a bunch of money off of their IP, just pay the fucking royalties so that we can keep playing the game and have the community grow? Like, should your anger be directed at Hasbro for wanting a slice of the pie, or Paizo for saying, no, we don't want to give anything. We want to continue to make all of our money and not pay squat? And I would say maybe the anger should be directed the other way and say, yeah, just pay your royalties. You've had a successful business for a couple decades now where you've made a lot of money, didn't have to pay anything. Just give them their slice of the pie. You're still going to stay, doing what you're doing.
I feel like a lot of that would come from the justification. Like, if they were like, okay, we are struggling for business, we are going to go under, we are pleading with, these third-party developers, help us stay afloat. I'm sure that most, if not all people, or third-party companies would help in that regard. But the thing that it honestly could be the way that they sold it. The way that it was presented, the fact that it was a leak, the fact that a lot of people aren't signing on for it, the fact that a lot of these people are now going to have to change, reorganize, the fact that it was an immediate 0 to 60 real quick, the fact that there was no real super let's explain this, the fact that it was a leak, it was very overwhelming. I feel like, because I made this point very tangentially earlier where I was saying, if Hasbro bought them out in 2000 and say, all right, we're going to start with a very low, royalty, and then if we want, we can up it by, a couple percent year after year, sure, whatever. That would be a lot more justifiable than just saying, hey, okay,
but does the justification matter? Because I don't think that justification matters, because I think just it's either yes, it's okay, or no, it's not. If I was to go around to university campuses and start, for whatever reason, charging to show the YouTube shorts and videos of Disinformed and show all their After Darks, and I started making bank off of it, right? So this is your idea. You started this thing. You've produced all this content and stuff, right? Now I've come in there and I kind of do some funny editing. I add some music to some of the videos and stuff, and I kind of take what you've created and I do my own little spin on it, and then I start making bank off of it, right? Now I'm not, living hand to mouth. So you're looking at me and you're not saying, well, if Michael was poor, if Doc was poor, then, he can do what he's got to do to make, ends meet. But if I'm making bank off of it, wouldn't you be like, hey, Doc, pretty cool what you've done. You've, kind of done some spin off the stuff that I created. I appreciate that. I see you're making a lot of money off of it. Can I get some of that?
Well, I think it's because they went about it in a very shady way, and there's other pieces of the new OGL that are just not okay.
Yeah,
and we can get into some of that now, and maybe it'll start making a little bit more sense. In both the non-commercial and commercial uses of this new OGL, the content you create is up for grabs for Wizards of the Coast to use however they wish. So for that to be a provision in non-commercial for people that aren't making money off of this, just homebrewing stuff to use for their own games, Wizards of the Coast can use that. That's a problem for me specifically. It states in there. Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
No, the only other counterpoint I was going to make, and you make a valid point, Jessica, that we should move on, because otherwise we'll just be debating this the whole time. The only counterpoint that I would like to make to your analogy is that do we know that these third parties are actually making bank? Do we know that they're breaking even? That would be the only thing that I would offer as a
if they're making they wouldn't apply to anybody making little, right? So it would be irrelevant unless you're making the 750K. Then
the company making 750K, but who's to say it's one dude? Most of these people are just more than one dude that's just let me create a campaign. These are things that are developed, play tested, sent out to other people who are recompensed for, their troubles and all these other things. So
which is why I don't think it would impact most everybody. I think it would only impact the Paizo as an example here. So I think the amount of people the amount of companies and businesses that would be impacted by this would be pretty insignificant. And that's why that's why I was asking the question of, should the anger maybe be redirected towards, a company like Paizo? Now, to the second point that you just mentioned, as much as I want to play devil's advocate, there's no real way to spin that in a way that I could
Yeah, no.
I could swing that. Yeah,
I gotta give you credit. You held on way longer than I would have ever done. So, like, props to you for arguing that. Like, I say what you say about the whole conversation. I feel like that is a perfect use of your degree. Is all the arguing that you just did just now. So put that in your resume.
Yeah, right up until it's like, oh, they just want to steal the ideas too and have it and do whatever they want. I'm like, oh, well, that's a tough one to. Let's see, how can I spin that?
So to answer your question, no, I don't think that the anger should be redirected at anybody else other than Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro.
Well, if they stopped at the first part, if they stopped at the first point,
then
everything I said before, I hold on to.
But in the document, and this is the same wording for non-commercial and commercial, you own the new and original content you create. You agree to give us a non-exclusive, perpetual, irrevocable, worldwide, sub-licensable, royalty-free license to use that content for any purpose.
That's the wording?
That is the wording.
All your fanfics are now canon.
Perpetual as well. So like, and where they can,
yes.
Yeah, and where they can sub-license it, so they can then make money off of it in multiple ways. So
yeah, and they can do it without giving credit or any kind of compensation.
Yeah, royalty free, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this was a point of concern brought up by the community and D&D Beyond users when that digital tool set was purchased by Wizards of the Coast last spring. That was a question that came up and was asked, and they got told, no, we would never. Almost a year later, it turns out that was a lie.
Yeah, that's why my D&D group is going to go pen and paper by the next time that we're meeting, because we don't want that stuff taken from us. Like, I know several people already in my group have deleted and moved all their characters off of D&D Beyond. I haven't paid for mine, so I don't feel like I need to yet, but eventually I will move my characters off, create their own character sheets, and not pay, Wizards of the Coast a single dime for it. I also will admit I haven't paid them a dime in years, nor do I plan on it.
And you're why they have to do this.
I mean, I have $500 worth of D&D books sitting on my shelf. Well, I've never paid for D&D Beyond, and I don't plan on doing so. I have a lot of stuff. I have a problem.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm looking because I'm trying to find my 4th edition, because that was the last book that I bought from them.
The legal wording that you threw out there, yeah, that one's definitely I'm trying to think of a way to like put a spin on it on Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast, like from their side. But that one's, I can't.
You can stop playing devil's advocate if you
want
to.
I'm just like, no, I always try. No, in my head, I always try to anyways, right? Because in general, I try to be like empathetic and try to understand the other point of view. This one is really tough though, just because the first one I could definitely see, and I'm like, well, hey guys, I don't think it's too much to ask for a slice of the pie that, when you're using their IP. Something like this, however, is a lot more difficult of a sales pitch, simply because you are coming from a huge company like Hasbro. So if you can start, sub-licensing other people's IP, or things that they've created rather, then you could just undercut them, right? You could say, hey, we're going to come out with our own Pathfinder stuff now. And how much are your books? Oh, $59.99. Okay, we're going to do it for $49.99, right? And just do what Walmart did to all the mom and pop shops, right? Come into town, undercut them on the prices until they go out of business. And then as soon as like Paizo's out of business, oh, now our Pathfinder books are now $79.99, right? Mm-hmm. So I can definitely see some major concerns there, because they're going to make a bunch of money off of it, and they're big enough and have the size and resources enough to operate at a loss if need be, just to get rid of the competitors.
Very true.
And this is a very sore spot for me as someone who makes digital art and posts it online for the public consumption. And at the same time, this is all happening with Wizards of the Coast having to deal with the reality of AI scraping for art images and then just warping them and spitting them back out for other people to make a profit on. So it's just like reminding me very much of that, and I'm having like a trigger moment here.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I was literally, as I was talking about that, I was like, this actually reminds me of the AI controversy with the art. Yeah, so I can definitely see why this would be a trigger for you, because like I said, this one is pretty indefensible. I can't even think of a way to try to spin this as a good idea. Like, I don't know how that got through like the drawing board, because I'm sure somebody in the room when they were drawing this language up, somebody must have said, how can we sell this though? Like, what sales pitch? Because like we talked about earlier with the, well, hey, you can't put stuff as Patreon exclusives, right? Because, and in reality, all the business people are like, well, that's because we want that money. But somebody in the room would say, yeah, but we can't say that because that sounds terrible. Because we want to make sure that everybody has equal access. We're all about equality and inclusivity. Oh, beautiful. Perfect. Sell it. This, though, I'm like, how do you sell this one? Like, who in the room would have been like, oh, this is a tough one to sell. Anybody got any ideas? And I just hear crickets.
Yeah, and that's why they worded it the way that they did. Because no one could come up with anything better.
Yeah, it's just, that part of it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I was angry. Terrible.
It's garbage, but that's why it's a giant ass controversy, That's why we're talking about it today.
And a lot of people are talking about it, even people that don't make D&D content. Like, there's a lawyer law channel, Legal Eagle, that did a whole video about it. Linus Tech Tips was talking about it. I think Neil Gaiman made a statement about it as well. Wow. Just it's a hot topic right now.
Wait, quick question: is it Gaiman or Gaiman? I always go Gaiman.
I've heard Gaiman.
I've heard them both.
Okay, yeah. So same with that. So when you first said Gaiman, I was like, okay, good. So I was right, and then you switched it, and I was like, oh crap, I'm still left with the confusion.
If he ever becomes a guest on this podcast, he can tell us in person. Yes,
that's right. But now he'll reject the thing because he's like, you guys don't even know how to say my damn name, and you want me to come on your show?
It's like, but that's why we need you, Neil. We
exactly.
need to know.
Come on, coach. Put me in.
Oh, no. But yeah, going back to the other problem that people have with this, it is the royalty structure. So the OGL was supposed to go into effect on the 13th. So just last Friday. That was Friday, right?
Yes.
Dates don't mean anything to me anymore. But that's when the OGL was supposed to go into effect. So anything that revenue made would have been cataloged and recorded to potentially pay out royalties starting January 1st of next year, 2024, for those that were using the commercial license piece of OGL 1.1. And the main thing that people were really pissed off about was the Kickstarter aspect of it. Kickstarter campaigns are subject to 20% royalty, and then if you use a different crowdsourcing site, say like GoFundMe, anything that is not Kickstarter would be subject to 25% royalties. So for a small creator trying to get their, campaign module published, 20%, that's detrimental.
So this doesn't just apply. So this doesn't just apply to the people making like this is like small time. Even if I only did 5K, they would get a cut. Is that what you're saying?
That was my understanding of it. And again, it bounces between legalese and plain speak, so I could have just been like way off. I don't have a law degree, so
that's understandable, but like the fact, like I feel like it even drives home that point with the fact that you weren't able to completely understand what is going on. The fact that it is purposefully obfuscating, like it is written in such a way to be confusing, makes it a lot easier for them to justify whatever
any contract. I'm not going to shade them for that. That's literally every contract anybody signs.
I understand.
Go look at your lease documents and tell me you get that thing from start to finish.
Oh no, I made sure of that. Because I don't like landlords, especially ones that like to charge me $300 to drain my bathtub, which I have had to do. I understand.
It's all that beard hair, sir.
Yeah, it's very itchy when I shower, but I understand that is the baseline for contracts. Is they're supposed to be obfuscating, they're supposed to be confusing as shit, so they can justify whatever the hell they want. That doesn't make it right.
Oh no, I agree. I'm just saying that I'm not going to throw any shade at them for having a complicated contract that us laymen and us poor regular folks have difficulty understanding.
Us normies.
I suspect that it's probably only people that would make a lot of money that would be impacted by this, solely because it would cost a fair bit of money to go through and like make sure you're, getting your cut out of everybody. And that would take a lot of work. And so I suspect that it probably wouldn't happen to most people, just because it would be very difficult from like Hasbro's point of view, and very inefficient from like a financial standpoint, to try to go out there and like just make sure that you're chasing down everybody to get everybody's cut of the pie there. So
probably. And there's like provisions in here saying that if you're going to sell licensed content, you need to register it, you need to get a creator badge that displays with your content, and
that's how they keep track of,
that's part of them keeping track of it. There's also a tier structure for this royalty program.
If they would,
I'm sure that's how they could sell it, though. It's like, no, it's not a royalty program. It's a loyalty program.
Yeah, exactly. Like that. Hasbro has been around for years, decades even. I almost said centuries. I don't know. I don't care. But if they have something to where they want to milk every single penny out of there, they will have an easy way to make sure that everything is cataloged in a way that they can be like, hey, you want to sell stuff through us, you're going to have to pay up. And I would also, like, considering their stipulations for using content that is homebrewed, where they can just use it at any time, use anything related to D&D, we can take your content. I feel like if they're wording it that way, that they can take any sort of homebrew campaign, then they would have no hesitation to take any sort of, like, nickel and dime any sort of creator. Because why not? Like, if they enforce it, if they don't enforce it, if they enforce it, sure. It's one of those things like a lot of laws where it's like, yeah, you can only go, like, there's a speed limit of 65 miles an hour, and you see people driving 75 on the freeway, sure, they're not enforcing it, but they could. So I feel like it's that idea where they'll put that in their, OGL, to where if they feel like they can, they will enforce it. If they don't care, they won't.
Yeah, I'd have to dig into it, because like the only stuff that I really followed through with this was the stuff that was broadcast and CBC wrote about, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Company. And my understanding of it was that they were only going to get that like large percentage for people that are making $750K US, right? So
yeah,
in that, that's my understanding of it. Now, if that's not the actual truth and they're going after like, every little, bit, then I totally disagree, right? The devil's advocate bit there also falls to the wayside there, because that's a really tough sales pitch. But if it's still the $750K USD, then I'm back on board. I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. That's a fair, if you're making that kind of money off of it, then give them a slice of the pie. Then I'm on board with it. The only thing, so like I said, assuming that it's the $750K, I'm on board with them there. I'm on board with them retiring the previous one. I can mentally, I can wrap my head around that. The only one that is indefensible to me is like claiming ownership of all of like third party stuff. Like that one there is just, well, that's complete BS.
Yeah. And with the royalties, like when they did an FAQ about it when it first came out, they made it seem like, yeah, if you are making over $750,000 in revenue on certain things, because there are things that are eligible to be considered for royalty, like what you have to pay royalties on, and things that aren't. But when you're reading this document and you look at the tier structure and like their reasoning behind it, there's wording in here that doesn't sit right with me and is kind of like up in the air, specifically with the intermediate tier. So the initiate tier is you have registered at least one licensed work, but you haven't generated $50,000 or more in gross revenue from the OGL commercial products in the year. The intermediate tier is the same thing. You have registered licensed work, but you're making between 50,000 but less than 750,000. The expert tier,
big gap.
You're over that 750,000. In the comments of it, the why, they say they're trying to minimize the burden on their creators as much as possible. you'll see below that if you're in the initiate tier, all we need from you is some basic information on what you've created and what you're offering for sale. Once you work your way to the intermediate tier, we'll ask you to provide annual financial reporting so that we can see whether royalties are due.
Okay.
So that reads to me like a question mark. You're making over $50,000 a year. We're going to see whether or not you owe us royalties.
It's putting the foot in the door. That's what I'm seeing, because you got to register. You got to do this. You got to make sure that you're reporting all this. And the fact that they can change all this, that number, that 750K, they could change it and then just give 30 days notice. Yeah, and the fact that you have to, like, register, like, you make any sort of money, you have to register. You make, between 5K and 750K. Now you have to register and also give, income reports to them as well. Like,
well, again, I mean, like, I can understand that, though. Like, you're making money off of their product, essentially, right? Like a spin-off that you're doing. So I can understand that and them wanting to keep track of it, especially to have some sort of management of how their product is getting used, or kind of like making sure that it maybe falls within a certain parameters. You don't want some sort of like, D&D After Dark that gets a little too far, off kilter there. Maybe you want to nip that in the bud before it becomes some sort of controversy or something. So I can definitely understand that. I think that if it's 50 to 750, that's a pretty big freaking gap.
Yeah,
So,
that's why the wording of it. It's like they use very specific wording, and there's a reason for it, and it's to their benefit, not anybody else's.
Yeah.
And there's also another piece of this that just makes no sense to me. So they talk about reaching the expert tier means you will pay us royalties on your revenue over 750,000. If you're doing incredibly well, you might level up to a custom license. But they don't say what incredibly well means to them, or what this custom license would entail.
I like level up. Like, hey, you could level up. What's up? Like,
I bet a person got high fives from everyone in that room when they said, "Let's level up." Oh man, he did it! He set the thing up.
That's right.
Yeah, but there's no mention of how you go about getting a custom license, what that entails, nothing else in this document at all. So again, their whole like, we want to be really clear about things.
I almost want to be like, well, if you get enough experience, that's how you typically level up. And then I'm like, well, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah, with the exception of having to close that gap, because or if it's a hard set number at 750, but if it's going to be a range, then having it maybe a little higher than 50, like 250 to 750 or something like that. I can wrap my head around hey, 23 years in, we need some changes, and changes 1, that we discussed at the start in length, and changes 3 here. These are happening. I'd be like, okay, 23 years in, okay, these changes make sense. With regards to the 30-day window, while I personally would be like, well, that's kind of messed up here, because that's not a lot of time, I could also understand, well, you got to give yourself a way to change it. And when it comes to leases and stuff like that, you usually just have to give a 30-day notice. Chances are they're not going to change it regularly, because it wouldn't make a lot of sense for them.
That's
so I could
assumptions. They did a drastic change now.
No. Like I said, I could kind of get behind all of that. It's really that second point that you discussed, though, Jesse. When it comes to it, that's where it's like, man, that's just bad faith. And you can just claim the work of somebody else's as your own, because that goes against everything that I'm trying to give them the credit for, right? I'm saying, hey, you have this IP, so you've created this product. Other people are benefiting off of it. So, hey, Hasbro or Wizards, I agree with you. People are benefiting off of your work. You should get a slice of that pie, right? But then that second point we discussed, it's well, that's the reverse, though, because these other people have now created this stuff, and you're wanting to just, you're just wanting to own it and make all the money off of it without having to give them anything. And that's where I'm like, oh, but see, if I give you the benefit of the doubt, but then you come around and you play hypocrite. And that's where I'm like, that's BS.
Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me a second time, shame on me again. Fool me a third, fourth, fifth time. Oops. You know, like that's how I feel like it is. Like when you kick a baby, you know, which I feel like they're doing.
Not if, just win, you know, like as you do, you know, you're walking through the grocery store and you're trying to reach the bread and the damn baby's in the way. So you just got to punt them down the aisle.
You pop the baby kicking cherry. Once you pop that, everyone expects that you're just going to do it again. Oh, there he's going. He's kicking the baby again. Like, see, there you go. Like, I feel like they're opening a can of worms with this whole setup, and the fact that, like, I would be a little bit more okay with it if they didn't have tiers that went down to you made $2. Someone paid you $2 for this campaign. Now you got to register it and make sure everything's all copacetic and all that other stuff. And it's like, why? Why do you care if some dude was like, hey, can I use your campaign? I'll pay you $2 for it. Well, no, because all of a sudden now I got to register all this other stuff. Like, how are you going to enforce that? How, like, does this person, because they got $2, have to register? Yes, technically, according to the OGL, they have to do it, or else they will be going against it, and they could get in. There's legal ramifications. Will that happen? No, but there's that ambiguity of it, and that's why I was making that point earlier. Like, if they just had that base, like you said, how it was reported to you initially, everything above that, you got to pay some cut. Asinine, but in other industries, that is the expectation. Sure, fine, go for it. That's how a lot of third parties make money on Steam, PlayStation, you name it, right? They pay a licensing ability. Same thing for using physics engines. You pay a licensing, you buy outright the ability to use Unreal Engine, whatever, then you can make your product, but you've already incurred some sort of loss. Sure, but when it's this sort of encompassing, and the fact that they also, and I won't like drive home the point of too that you're already in disagreement with, because we're just going to sit here jerking each other off about how this second part is the worst
I don't hate
thing.
this idea. Tell me more. Disinformed after dark.
Tell me more. Like, does she have a car? But yeah, like this.
I hope you ordered those anal beads off Etsy there if we're going down this path, sir.
It was $54. It wasn't worth the cost. Also, I didn't
include shipping.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't even bother with it. I don't use Etsy, so I don't know how
I'm
their
shipping
website
this
works.
right here.
Oh, I'm shipping it right up my ass. That's the point. Plot twist. But like, I feel like if it was just that base thing, it would. I'm sure a lot. Yeah, there would be some, upset. There would be, because like you already are betraying the community's trust by being like, everyone can use it. It's supposed to be for everyone. Because, and this is a point that we haven't really brought up, that was brought up when my D&D group had this conversation on Sunday. People already, I'm an exception, people buy the source book. People buy all these other things. I didn't, because I didn't really need
I'm
to.
people.
Exactly. Yeah. People buy the source book. I bought the 4th edition source book because I felt it was necessary. I haven't, because I've started replaying 5th edition. I play it once a month, and I've been playing it for 7 months. So, do I need to buy it? Probably, but am I? No. Most people that play it on a regular basis, they will buy it because using a physical copy is way easier than using D&D Beyond, using like trying to find PDFs of it online, all these other things. It's a lot more complicated when you have something that's physical that's right there that you can use. And is that sound pretty understandable, like something that you do in a way, Jessica?
Yeah, and like part of it for me too is I collect D&D and TTRPG stuff. So I have hundreds of dollars and hundreds of dice. I have all of the source books for the rules. I have some campaign modules, and I have some supplementary material. I like D&D. It is what some people would call a hyperfixation. Like, all of my time revolves around D&D. I watch live actual plays. I listen to podcasts. Like, it's my thing. It's what I do. So I even for like our games, I'll have a physical book with me, but mostly I use D&D Beyond because I do find it to be easier than flipping through my paper.
Fair.
I have both. So I have my binder full of stuff. I have D&D Beyond on my tablet. I've got my books, all my dice. I'm good.
Yeah, but in that case, like, even if you play third-party content, third-party campaigns, like the book that you had shown earlier in the episode, you still have purchased all of that content from Wizards of the Coast. It's not like, okay, here's this third-party content, and you're like, well, I don't need anything else. I'm totally okay. Most of the campaign books, at least in my experience with, I think it's War Chief Gaming or something like that, with Ouroboros is the campaign, is the third-party thing that I use. Absolutely 10 out of 10 would recommend. But anyway, using that, it's a supplemental book. It's not, let's rewrite all the rules for 5th ed and then sell that. They're like, these are the additional things. It's essentially, it's its own module. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's like, well, we already got the chassis over here. Now let's add an engine. Now let's add mufflers, or, I don't know, trick your ride, pimp your ride. That's what they're doing, essentially. They're taking a normal car and they're pimping it out to make it nicer.
Yeah, and like supplementary material, if you look at what I have here, which is Tal'Dorei Reborn, which is specific to Critical Role, and even if you look at Griffin's Saddlebag, they published a book recently that's just all magical items that you can use in your campaign. Like, it's just extra stuff. It's not necessarily D&D lore or mythos, but it's just different things that you can use while you play D&D.
Yeah.
So they're nice to have.
Yeah, they're additional things where the average person, because I would say that I'm not average, put in whatever jokes as you will, sure, fine, whatever. I deserve them. But in this case, like, it is all supplementary. You still want the source books, so for easy reference, whether that's through D&D Beyond, because I know I have a free account, but I know other people pay for subscriptions and stuff like that through D&D Beyond.
Yeah.
You either use D&D Beyond for the source material or you buy them yourself. Either or, you still have purchased, you still have done a financial transaction through Wizards of the Coast. And I don't know if we're going to get to this, but a lot of the reactions that I've been seeing for these third-party companies is, fuck you, we're going to do our own thing and make our own,
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of it
okay, cool.
As well, because Wizards messed up and they were silent for a long-ass time.
They've done fucking goofed.
Yeah, they fucked up in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But they have backpedaled now, haven't they?
They have since backpedaled a couple times.
Yeah.
But like, to Dr. Michael's point, we can talk about what this actually looks like for creators and publishers. Like, in reality, what is covered, what is not, what are they going to have to pay royalties on? We can talk about Critical Role because it is the content creator and publisher I'm most familiar with. It is the one
That's
I have
fine, yeah.
the most data on, and
it.
I love them. So, I'll talk about them forever and always.
Because they also created their, like, I've only seen titles of of articles, so I don't know exactly, but didn't they create their own controversy in some sort of way, shape, or form? Or am I misreading what I saw?
Kind of. It's surrounding the OGL because they've been silent on it. People are like, well, why isn't Critical Role saying anything? Why haven't they dropped them a D&D Beyond as a sponsor? Y'all, if you're under contract with a sponsorship, you cannot just be like, you hold to that contract, and there's probably NDAs involved in that. They cannot speak out against D&D Beyond or Wizards of the Coast because of this contractual obligation, and people got really mad about it. It's like, you're not using your brain, though. Think about this critically. They're under contract. They cannot say anything. They did make a vague statement, and they have had a good working relationship with Wizards of the Coast and D&D Beyond for years.
Yeah.
D&D Beyond was one of their very first sponsors, and they do have 2 campaign guides that are covered in D&D branding. This is one of them, Call of the Netherdeep, and there's also the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. I'm sure they have like some deal with Wizards for the interchangeable IP between Critical Role's IP and D&D Beyond's.
Yeah.
But they've
that's
worked
also
together
a-
a long time. Chris Perkins
Yeah.
has been on the show, and he's one of the lead designers for D&D.
Yeah.
Even if it's not an NDA or something that's like contractually keeping them or forcing them to keep their mouth shut, there's just the economic incentive of like, hey, we have a good working relationship with these guys. Let's not like, speak out on it.
Yeah, you shit on the bet on one sponsor. Why would another sponsor want to, put money in you? Like, I totally understand that. Like, there's several podcasts that I listen to that have done voice, like, their own personal ads for BetterHelp. And BetterHelp is starting to get in the limelight for being slightly problematic. And they also were problematic when they started as well. So it's like, but they still air those ads because they are contractually obligated to. You can't just say, well, they did a problematic, and so we have to drop them. Like, as cool as that would be,
we already cashed the check.
Yeah, as cool as that would disqualify them from ads or from, sponsors, and that's their livelihood, and is not getting into the idea of a livelihood and all that other cool stuff, because that's not the podcast for this. But, like, you can't go back on these contractual agreements, because if you start crushing those, you don't really have these agreements in other ways of income. So I understand that. I thought they did something slightly problematic, and that's why I wanted clarification. But if they were just silent on their thing, that isn't something
all
I
that
could
is
judge
to
them
say
for.
is that Bones and Liquid Death, if you sponsor us, we will never betray you.
Exactly. No matter how problematic you two are, which you've never been.
The only thing I can think of with Critical Role recently that may have been slightly problematic was, other than their silence on this, they did eventually come out with a statement last Friday in support of creators. It was very vague, didn't really say anything about the OGL or Wizards of the Coast.
Fair.
And, people were like, they should have said more again.
Was that
Contractual
after
obligations.
Wizards had already released their statement backpedaling?
I think this came before.
Okay.
It was the same day that Wizards made their statement backpedaling.
Oh, so
but
they probably already knew. So the two parties had already probably talked like, hey, we're going to release this. Okay, cool. We can come out and say like, oh, we support the creators, knowing that you're about to come out and say that. Okay, that makes sense then.
I can't fault them for that. It's a business at the end of the day. As cool as it would be for them to just live with, do their D&D without having to worry about any sort of income whatsoever, that's not how the world works, unfortunately. So they do need sponsors, and if that means they got to sign contracts, they got to sign contracts. I can't fault people for that.
Yeah, but
unfortunately.
Thinking back on it, Michael, I think what you may be referring to was one of their campaign introductions for their current campaign. Originally, they did like an archaeology theme. They were all dressed up in 1940-ish outfit archaeology shit, and people were like, what was the thing?
I think that's the
something about imperialism and white supremacy, and they had they changed their intro for their videos because of it.
Oof.
I think that's what you may be referring to.
That might be. If that happened recently around the same time as the OGL, then that is probably what I...
That was before... that was last year that happened.
Oh.
But I'm sure people brought it up again because, they were being quiet about it. And so they're like, this isn't the first time they've been problematic or something like that. I'm sure.
Okay.
People do what they do.
Yeah.
Wait, does that mean that we're canceling Indiana Jones now?
Yes, actually, that is what that means.
They should have been canceled before the fourth movie, and I'm just gonna say that and put that on the table and be done with it. And I mean cancel, I mean they shouldn't have made anything after the third movie, and that's all I'll say. Anyway, let's move on.
But Critical Role has had massive success. They did start out as a Pathfinder campaign, transitioned to 5th edition to start streaming, and I talked about that briefly the first time I was here. But they went on to become a 100% creator-owned media company because it was important to them to be able to be in charge of their stories that they were telling and be able to go in whatever direction they wanted to without answering to higher-ups. They also have their own nonprofit called the Critical Role Foundation, as well as a publishing company, Darrington Press, which did publish the Tal'Dorei Reborn campaign guide that I have over here. Not all revenue made by Critical Role has been made public, and not all of it would even count towards what is considered eligible revenue under the OGL. But I
Fair.
think it's safe to assume that they are in the category of content creators that make more than $750,000 a year. Some of the numbers that I have from like their revenue comes in the form of the October 2021 Twitch data breach. It revealed that they took the top spot in payout, earning $14 million in a 2-year period.
Whew.
Nice.
Yeah,
Oh,
a lot of money
Lord.
just from Twitch. They also have a YouTube channel. They have about just under 2 million followers and then 500 million views. And since the content on it is mostly long form, it's just rebroadcasting of their streams, which are anywhere from 3 to 5 hours long, depending on the episode. Those are the kind of videos that YouTube pays out the most money for because they carry the highest number of adverts. Now, it is important to note that in the open gaming license, videos don't count as covered works. It's only role-playing games and supplement and printed media and static electronic file formats. They say it does not include anything else, including but not limited to things like videos, virtual tabletops or VTT campaigns, computer games, novels, apps, graphic novels, music, songs, dances, and pantomimes. You may engage in these activities only to the extent allowed under the Wizards of the Coast fan policy or separately agreed between you and us.
Did you say, and did they write pantomimes?
They did.
That's so specific. I mean,
Yeah,
I understand novelizations because there are a lot. They're not visible, but I think at count about 30 novels of the Dragonlance series because I was super into that 10 some odd years ago, and I kept them all because they're decent books. So that actually is a lot more interesting to me that they are only they're only focusing on not media in terms of written media for novelizations. They're not in regards to video games or other non-static media. They're only focused on campaigns and
and supplementary material.
That's so bizarre. I feel like if money was an important aspect,
why not go after the video? That's $14 million in 2 years, right?
Well, that's what I was saying earlier, though. It might be more just having control over how your stuff is actually getting utilized, so you can nip particular controversies in the bud, or make sure that it's all falling within a particular family friendly way, or something to that effect, right?
That would make sense if you had controller oversight.
Yeah, that's a better way to phrase it.
The better word for it.
Yeah,
oversight over things like, say, communities to D&D episodes or other sort of like Harmon Quest. I don't know if Harmon Quest is specifically D&D, but like that sort of similar vein of people sitting down at a table. Like if there's any sort of mention in D&D, then you gotta then now you have to pay some sort of aspect to us, some sort of financial recompense for even having that as an a part of your video game, novelization format. Like if money was such a big deal, I would be like, okay, royalties from community, royalties from. I think Rick and Morty did a D&D-esque style episode at some point. I can't remember off the top of my head.
The other part,
but it'd be a lot harder to get all that too, though. Like if you're having oversight of everything, and when people are coming out with like third-party content, and you're making them like register and have a license and stuff, then you can track that. But if you're like trying to track, what are they putting on videos or what music is getting made off of it, that would be a lot more difficult, I think, to keep track of anyhow. But also then that's just like, that's putting such a like limiting people so much by like handcuffing them in the way they can interact with your media. And I think that maybe that's it, is that they don't want to have oversight of how you interact with the medium. They just want to have oversight of the content of said medium.
But they're already doing that with... My voice cracked. That's how passionate I am. I'm going through puberty again. But they're already doing that with any sort of campaign, because campaigns aren't just something that you sit down and hash out. campaigns are typically things that you work on as you play the game. Like you're scripting everything down. That's how Ouroboros, the third party campaign that I use, it is entirely based off of a version of D&D that they had played, and then they had just written out and fleshed out more parts of the world, and they're like, this is now this is the module essentially that they sell. And I can see even for content creators, like art, like, you know, that's a way of engaging with the media, or with the medium essentially, is any sort of reaction, like taking D&D and be like, well, fuck, let's make our own campaign. That's a reaction to media. Like taking, you know, your character from a D&D campaign and like, well, this is how I visualize this character. I'm going to draw them and put them on DeviantArt. That's
Which
engaging
I
with
did.
it. Exactly. Like that's something that a lot of passionate fans do with the fandom that they're associated with. Like you look up any sort of original work, and there will be a group of people, a group of dedicated artists that make art of it. I mean, shit, you look at our podcast. We have at least 2 fantastic artists that have created art for us. And we make sure we attribute wherever we can, obviously, as people can see, the logo that we have is courtesy of the person we're talking to right now, Bad Artist Jessie. Absolutely fantastic art. But, like, that's still her engaging with us as a medium. So any sort of engagement, the fact that they want to pick and choose what they're, like, what they want to either take ownership or monetize is already really suspect, that they're just focusing on these campaigns alone. It seems like they're not focusing... Sorry.
The wording of it, though. They say you can engage with all those other things under their fan content policy. And one of the first rules that they ask you to follow with that, rule number 1 says one word, FREE. You can make fan content that you share with the community for free. Free means free. And while Critical Role isn't charging for these videos, there are other content creators like Dimension 20 that are. You have to pay for a Dropout subscription if you want to watch any of their campaigns other than the first episode of each campaign. They've also broken off into a new storytelling venture called Worlds Beyond Number that will be a Patreon exclusive. It's one tier, $5, but that's how you get access to their content. So then it comes into question, does that violate this fan content policy? And if it does, what consequences could they face?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, so this whole controversy, with the exception of owning the third party material that's produced, is vaguely reminiscent of something that happened with a fan base and that I am like super into as a few years back, which is Star Trek. I am a huge Star Trek fan. I've gone on the cruises, and there's all sorts of different paraphernalia around my house. You know, so for a long time, you know, Star Trek was just the original series for, 20 some odd years before Next Gen came out. And then even after DS9 and Voyager ended, you had a good 15 years of no content of Star Trek, right? Like nothing new coming out. And to fill that void, the fan base created their own stuff, right? You had novels getting produced. You had Star Trek Continues, which was a great fan made, picking up episodes literally of just fans getting together and creating sets and producing new scripts and doing all that. And there was movies getting produced, just fan films and stuff. And it was so good. Oh, sorry.
No, the only reason why I'm adding anything to it is because I know a lot about the beginnings of fan culture. Star Trek was one of the original fandoms that helped encourage fanzines. They were one of the main they were probably one of the bigger fandoms that helped contribute to that overall culture of people writing fan fictions and sending them to a person that would collate them into one whole magazine that would be distributed to everyone who contributed. That is Star Trek has so much influence over fandom as an idea, how we perceive fandom now, that like I can see like what you're saying is true, and it goes so much more than that. Like it's so difficult to explain how integral it. I don't know if I'm using the word right. I don't know.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah. So like when you say Star Trek is an important aspect of how we perceive fandom, it most certainly is, and then some. Sorry, I just wanted to add further to what you were saying because
I appreciate that.
Give it more gravitas.
And so similar to what Hasbro and Wizards have done just in the last month, or were attempting to do, I guess. CBS and Paramount did a few years back, where they for the longest time, nobody cared if you were producing like fan films and fan TV shows and novels and stuff within the Star Trek universe. It was great. And it was really cool because some of these fan films would actually get some of the actors from Star Trek to like appear on them. So it added like an air of legitimacy to them as well, right? Because you'd have, this is like a real Star Trek actor like appearing on this fan film. This is fantastic. But, a few years back, like now 6-7 years, when Star Trek when CBS and Paramount started to, revamp Star Trek and start kicking more money into it with like Discovery coming out and Strange New Worlds and all the series that have come out since, they locked all that stuff down and they said, okay, that's it. From now on, you can't produce any of this like fan film stuff. And they just shut it all down, which resulted in, a lot of these productions that were in process getting shut down. And then a couple of the ones that were already getting made but hadn't come out yet, having to like do a bunch of alterations so that it was like Star Trek-esque, but no longer Star Trek. And so I kind of like liken that to what's happened with the Wizards bit here, which is why I think I was empathetic for some of their points, because I was for like, with the Star Trek stuff, I was like, well, I loved all the fan film stuff and community that was getting built around it. But at the same time, sure, Paramount, do what you got to do if it makes you get more money so that you're funneling more money into the Star Trek fandom itself, like by creating new material that's like official and has the big budget behind it. If you want to like stop all these little productions so that all the attention goes your way, I'm on board with it. Whatever we need to do to make Star Trek bigger and better and more accessible to more people, which is why I was kind of okay with some of the stuff, but never did CBS or Paramount say, okay, we now own those fan films. That were made.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm like, that's a line like drawn way too far from me. Like where I'm just like, okay, well, fuck you then.
As a survivor of a previous cultural appropriation of the fandom, like I see where you're coming from now.
That's right. Yesterday they came for our Star Trek. Today they came for our Dungeons and Dragons. Tomorrow they come for us.
Oh, they came for my Star Trek and I said nothing.
That's right. That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's what I was thinking.
Sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, going back to what is covered and what is not. So the videos, as of right now, don't fall under the OGL. Again, that could be subject to change within 30 days. We don't know. But for now, they're not. Critical Role also receives money via donations, and they do donate 85% of the money earned from them to various charitable causes, but they do keep 15% to help fund the team. OGL does not consider donations to be eligible revenue. So right now they got two things going for them that they potentially will not have to pay royalties on. Critical Role has a shop.critical role. They sell merchandise such as dice, clothes, pins, books. A percentage of those profits also go to charities. And this is all stuff for their IP. They don't sell any random Dungeons and Dragons stuff on their site other than the 2 campaign guides that I showed you that were D&D branded. They do sell those on their website. But other than those 2 campaign guides, I don't think anything else that they sell would fall under OGL eligible revenue. Darrington Press, however, would. They do the Tal'Dorei campaign guide. They will potentially release more campaign guides under this OGL or 1.0A if they keep that in place. Potentially other open game licenses that are in the works. Who knows? But if they do stick with D&D's new OGL and agree to it, then any new campaign guides they publish under it will be subject to royalties. They do have a partnership with Dark Horse Comics as well that produces their comic book series, which is the Legend of, or Vox Machina Origins, excuse me, the Tales of Exandria and the Mighty Nine Origins. Again, those are their IP. It's based on their characters, their original story. I don't think that would fall under the OGL as it's described now. Again, subject to 30 days notice.
That, I don't know, because it is something like, did it explicitly exempt characters and was only about the setting for campaigns? Because if there are characters that are specific to campaigns, like say if they distributed their first campaign that they did and then had their characters in there as like non-playable characters, then that would technically fall under the stipulations that you were mentioning, where, you know, if it's part of the campaign, it's now owned by Wizards of the Coast / Hasbro. So that's like, well, where does that go? Like,
you do make an interesting point. Like, where do we draw the line? Because the characters from Vox Machina are NPCs in this campaign guide. You can interact with them. They have now been printed and published under the OGL. So yeah, that might be gray area then.
Yeah, in that case, Wizards of the Coast can, and most likely might, depending on how greedy they are.
Well, could, because they've since so all this stuff has been kind of kicked to the wayside, right?
Yeah, the license back provision specifically, I know has been called out and walked back. Also, now that I think about it, in this book, in the license agreement that's on the back page, there is an addendum to the license on behalf of Critical Role LLC, so they have a special license with Wizards of the Coast already. Now that I'm looking at it,
which makes sense. They've already done. I mean, they've gotten several modules or supplemental materials published with the D&D stamp, so I can understand there being an exception to them. But then, like, how you're like adding
others?
More exceptions?
Well, I'm actually wondering now. That's because now that I know that like they're willing, like, you know, Wizards was willing to make like addendums for them, for instance. I wonder how many other people did, because if I was a company and like I was making, you know, decent change, you know, decent coin off of this stuff, even if I thought, okay, well, this, you know, OGL lets me do it all, you know, this is great, I'd probably still want to, like, you know, CYA, right? Like, cover my ass, like, and just let me like get some, like, you know, contractual language with them just in case anything ever changes. I'm good still. So I wonder if they're probably not the only ones that have some sort of like side agreement that provides them some sort of umbrella coverage to be protected from a change to the OGL in general.
Possibly, but it's hard to say how many do and what happens to the ones that don't then.
Well, going forward, I bet you a whole bunch of them will. Even with these current changes having been abandoned, if I was like everybody now, I'd be like, you know what? How about we get an addendum here?
Well, I feel like, and we can lead into this, unless there is more that you wanted to say about the OGL in particular, we can lead into like what other people are doing and just like touching upon, because I know you said you were more familiar with Critical Role as opposed to like other ones, but like I would presume that there are people or publishing companies that have said this is what we're doing in things that are like easy to say without going into too much detail.
Yeah, I just wanted to like lay out a base of like how this could potentially affect publishers and creators. Like for Critical Role, they have revenue coming from everywhere. They have the animated series that started last year as well, and that's another significant revenue point for that brand. But other publishing companies don't. That's all they do. They publish books. So Critical Role may not be affected by it so much. And when all this OGL nonsense first started, the Critical Role community was like, oh my God, this is going to affect them. I'm like, I really don't think it is. Not very much, though. Not as much as other publishers. And in response, other publishers have come out and made statements of their own, announced their own RPGs that they're going to be doing. Because the leak happened on the 5th. I had mentioned that Wizards of the Coast has been silent on it. They were silent for almost a week. they came out on the 10th and said, we'll make a statement soon, and then didn't make a statement until the 13th. But in that time, all these other publishers came forward. So Cobalt Press, which is actually the third largest D&D publisher, made a statement on the 10th that they would be creating their own core fantasy TTRPG system, and they said that it will be available, open, and subscription-free for those who love it, codename Project Black Flag. So
There you go.
I know there's some history buffs here, Dr. Michael. The history and symbolism behind the Black Flag, just like knowing that information, it's a major fuck you to Wizards of the Coast.
Mm-hmm.
For those playing the home game, as Shane likes to say, the Black Flag has been used since at least the 1400s, and it's most commonly associated with piracy. It was designed to strike fear in the hearts of their victims, but it was also a show of defiance that the crew no longer held allegiance to the state. And it came also to mean give no quarter, so in a time of war or battle, you plan to kill the enemy on the spot.
That being said, I would hope that anybody that, would start to utilize that new setup that they're planning on coming out with then would learn the lessons from this and not necessarily trust anything to remain free and accessible and without change going forward. So
we'll go into that as well, because I think that's what people do expect, and it is because of Paizo. There's another company too that made an announcement that they're going to make their own RPG on the 11th. It's MCDM Productions. They described their new RPG as cinematic and tactical, and I believe both Cobalt Press and MCDM Productions are with Paizo on their initiative. So, as we mentioned before, they are the creators of Pathfinder. Their statement came out on the 12th in support of the original OGL. They backed Ryan Dancy's claims, I think I'm pronouncing his last name right, the original creator of the OGL, that they cannot reverse this. This was meant to be perpetual and irrevocable, and they know because they were there when it was written. And they said in this statement that while other people may not have the resources to fight it in court, they absolutely plan on doing so if it's necessary for the community. In this, they also announced that they have a plan to create a neutral open RPG license in collaboration with other companies. There's a whole list of them. I'll read you part of their statement. But they won't own this license. They want to have it stewarded by a nonprofit foundation that specializes in open source material, like the Linux Foundation. I don't know if the Linux Foundation will ultimately be the ones that end up owning this and stewarding this open game license. They're calling it ORC. What does it stand for? I had it somewhere,
shoot.
but
my DM told me on Sunday, but open resource something. I think I might. I know the O is open, obviously.
It is the Open RPG Creative License,
yeah,
also known as ORC.
Yeah.
So, cute little thing. But I'll read you their statement, and it goes over the third-party publishers that have also signed up onto this little thing. And it's filled with sass directed towards wizards. So
hell yeah.
I love it. In that statement, they said, "We hope that you will continue to support Paizo and other game publishers in this difficult time for the entire hobby. You can do your part by supporting the many companies that have provided content under the OGL. Support Pathfinder and Starfinder by visiting your local game store, subscribing to Pathfinder and Starfinder, or purchase of the core rulebooks, Core Rulebook Pocket Edition or Pathfinder Beginner Box." They said you can also take advantage of the discount code Open Gaming for 25% off checkout of those items.
Hell yeah.
Support Cobalt Press, Green Ronin, Legendary Games, Roll for Combat, Rogue Genius Games, and other publishers working to preserve a prosperous future for open gaming that is both perpetual and irrevocable. We will be there at your side. You can count on us not to go back on our word forever.
Oh, okay.
Well, again, I'm pretty sure if you went back 23 years when the first OGL was rolling out, you probably would have heard some similar language.
Yeah, yes,
so,
it's still fair. Once one baby has been kicked,
that's right.
The likelihood of a second baby being kicked is a lot higher.
So without Shane being present, I'll still have to reference a little wrestling here and go with I'll follow Stone Cold Steve Austin's lead here. DTA, don't trust anybody. I'm also not entirely sure how I feel if in this org, I think org is a cool name, but I'm not sure how I feel about an acronym if the letter R is an acronym. Like if it stands for RPG, I'm like, the acronym itself contains an acronym. I'm like, I don't know how I'm feeling about that.
When you're trying to make something sound cool.
Yeah.
You gotta
that fits
sacrifice
the theme
something.
of the product that you're trying to license.
Yeah,
for.
no, I like it. I just was like,
I mean,
wait, the
it
R
could
is the
be,
acronym as well?
Role-playing game, all hyphenated, so it's one word, so it counts.
And that's part of the reason why they want not to be the stewards of this. They don't think that any one company should own this license because, they get bought and sold by a bigger company like Hasbro. Hasbro can come in and change it whenever they want, as we're seeing now.
No, I think it's a great idea. Yeah. Especially getting like a foundation to steward it.
It would be fantastic if Linux took over for it. Like, oh man, you said that and I got goosebumps. I was like, that'd be fantastic. Sorry, I thought I was, a programmer back in the day, and I used Linux distros for a while because I thought I knew what I was doing. I don't. But it's really cool, that sort of open license thing, to where like we could right now take the Linux, the operating system, and design our own distribution of it right now, and not have to deal with really any sort of copyright aspect, because that is the whole idea, is that it is open source. So like an organization that is similar, doesn't necessarily have to be, but similar to Linux, is absolutely like phenomenal.
It'll be interesting to see
the steps.
What happens, just because D&D is already so cemented in the cultural kind
zeitgeist.
Yeah, that's exactly. And it's just so well known. Like it already has that like branding, right? Like especially when you think of like role playing games, it's very much like a Kleenex or a Q-tip, right? Like you don't. If I'm about to sneeze, hey, do you have a Kleenex? I don't ask, do you have a tissue? I'm referencing the brand itself, right? Yeah. So it's so much like that. Like if I think, oh, it's a tabletop, role playing game, there, like I'm not going to go through like this long winded brand. It's just like, oh, getting together to play D&D or something like that, just as a general like thing that most people will be able to understand. And especially with it, getting name dropped in Stranger Things, which is not yet finished. So, it'll get kind of thrown out more there. I believe there's actually in the next year or two, there's both a Dungeons and Dragons movie getting released, but also a TV show.
The Dungeons and Dragons movie is actually set to come out in March. It's called Honor Amongst Thieves. Among Thieves. One of those.
It's got a couple of big names in it too.
And there's a TV show that they're producing now that I saw the article announcing.
They did announce the TV show as well, but like you look up Dungeons and Dragons, that TV show, and the movie, it's not what comes up. It's everything surrounding this OGL nonsense. Nobody's talking about it.
No, of course, but by the time those items come out, especially like down the line, the TV show and stuff, this will kind of already, because this just happened, so it's definitely going to be in the headlines now. My point being, though, that with like a TV show, with movies, with it getting name dropped in different mediums, like different TV shows and whatnot in general, I just don't know how much room there is for like new things to kind of come and steal a good chunk of that market. So as opposed to just like falling kind of back in line under like, especially if they've abandoned any change to the OGL and they just go back to the old way of doing things before they kind of created this clusterfuck for themselves. I suspect that it might just go back to business as usual, just because so many people are familiar with D&D and it already has such a lengthy history of like almost 50 years strong.
Speaking of, the 50-year anniversary is supposed to be next year. That's when D&D is supposed to be released. However, they've alienated a large part of their customer base. They've left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, and we'll go over more next. Okay. Just the timeline of events, but I'm not sure with everything that's happened that they can recover from this.
Really?
And I believe that is going to close the cover on this stellar installment of the Disinformed podcast. We thank you all for being here as per usual. There's a link tree down in the show notes that you can go to if you want to find all of our irrelevant or relevant socials, and you can follow us there. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the show because it helps us out, and of course it gets new episodes winging your way every lovely Monday morning as soon as they hit the airwaves. And then, of course, if you could like, subscribe, rate, and review, we would love to hear from you. And beyond that, we hope that you have a wonderful week. And so, for the Disinformed podcast this week, I'm Shane.
And I'm
I'm
Michael.
I'm Jesse.
And zippity zoop, we're out of here.